Hi, and welcome to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Today, I want to talk about defending your employees against unruly customers. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. My name is Kale Houser, owner, founder, CEO of Kale Houser Leadership, business consulting, leadership consulting, and coaching. Hey, I hope you've been finding these beneficial. Like I said, we've had some pretty legit guest speakers coming up, and I've got a few more in the pipe that are just waiting to share their knowledge and expertise and tips and all the good stuff with you as in the next couple episodes. But for now, something came across, and it was actually something that my dad had thought of. So thank you, Dad, for this idea, and it's a great topic to talk about. And that is the sense of, really it sums down to, what is your allegiance to your employees? Like, how much do you owe them to defend them, especially in the face of whether it be an unruly customer, a client that treats them poorly, some sort of scenario where a negative feedback is happening onto your employee from an external source, right? Whether, depending on what type of business that you're running, whether it be a client, a customer if in a restaurant, anything of that nature. What is, as the leader, as that person's leader in your organization, what is your responsibility to defend them? And specifically, it was, talked about a little bit of, do you go so far as to refuse service to the offending party, to that customer or client or whatever external factor is causing this disconnect? Do you refuse them service or kick them out of your restaurant or, close their account, whatever that may be? And what is our responsibility as the leader for that? And of course, if you didn't get this already, as with most things dealing with leadership, a lot of it is, the answer is, it depends, right? There are so many potential factors that lead up to this that may, once you start looking at them and analyzing them and figuring out what the causal factors of this incident are, drastically change how you should respond to it. And what we're going to do here is kind of go through a couple different questions that when you're faced with this scenario, because almost invariably you probably will be, right? You stay in business long enough, something's going to happen because, hey, guess what? Business is made up of people, and people don't always get along. We don't always communicate clearly. We don't always, we're not always on the same page as far as our goals, desires, and motivations and things like that. Not to mention all the external factors that impact our emotions and our perceptions. And it's an easy thing to have a miscommunication and a wrong perception of, and different expectations of outcomes and all that kind of stuff. I think you kind of get that point. So as you go through this and you ask yourself these questions as you find yourself in this scenario, and certainly it is drastically different if you are a restaurant owner or a store manager and you have an acute reaction from a customer to one of your employees, right? So something happened, their food was cold, or they brought them the wrong product after they'd paid for it, whatever that case is that, that garners that acute anger, that acute offense towards one of your employees or one of your teammates is drastically different than, this long-term customer. Maybe you run a marketing agency and you've got a client that you've worked with for a really long time. They've spent, probably tens of thousands of dollars with you, whatever that case may be. And then over the course of time, whether you brought on a new employee that wasn't communicating or gelling with them correctly, and then that customer finally kind of reached their tipping point and unloaded on their account representative, right? So they're kind of similar situations, but definitely different in nature. And I hope you can see that. And I want to walk you through, because ultimately this comes down to being reactionary to that situation versus being intentional to that situation, okay? And a lot of that, the defining factor between those two phases of emotion and those two phases of communication are the questions that you ask, right? It should be very clear to you, and hopefully I'm not the first person that has ever told you this, that the quality of your questions determine the quality of your answers, right? You can't expect, garbage in, garbage out. You can't expect to have garbage coming in and then just this magic, invaluable inputs coming back into you, or garbage going out, coming back into you. You get what I'm saying? So one of the first questions that I think you need to work through is one, obviously, what was the causal effect of this, right? Is this a pure acute, like, I ordered my steak medium well and you brought it out rare, whatever that is, right? And some people fly off the handle at that, like, oh, you got one job, right? Blah, blah, blah. And we've certainly all seen that. So what is the causal factor, right? You need to be able to, potentially in the middle of this very emotionally intense moment, you could have people screaming and blah, 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 blah. You need to be able to be that calm person, because guess what? You're the leader. You're the one in charge. You're the one that has stepped up and said, this is my organization. This is where we're going. These are our values. This is our culture. And this is how we're going to do things. And as part of this is how we're going to do things is how are you going to respond to cultural external attacks, right? For lack of a better term. How are you going to respond when people treat your people negatively? How are you going to respond when you get that negative feedback for whatever reason it is? It could be completely valid. It could be off the chains, whatever that is for your organization. The point is being intentional about that. And one is, what are the causal factors? Okay, this is pretty basic. I'm probably not telling you anything you don't realize, on the surface yourself is, can that be handled acutely? Like, sir, I'm sorry that your steak came out that way. Give me 5 more minutes. I'll get you one replaced and it's on the house, right? Or a free dessert, whatever that is. We've probably all been in those types of scenarios. I certainly have at restaurants where it was, cooked wrong or incorrectly, or they brought me something I didn't order and vice versa. And they, the manager came out, apologized and, hey, here's this, coupon for appetizer next time you come in, or a free dessert, something to fix the scenario. But when you go a little bit deeper than that, something that's not so acute, you really need to ask yourself can this customer be rehabilitated? And let me say that again, asking yourself in this scenario, we're presuming you're not in the middle of people screaming and yelling back and forth where you need to immediately de-escalate a situation emotionally. We're talking more long-term, like they've said, hey, what, due to X and Y service or X and Y things or X and Y employee over there, John is just not cutting it. We're going to take our business elsewhere. And you need to ask yourself, can this customer be rehabilitated, as in, can they continue to match what your culture is, what you're trying to do? Now, there's lots of levels to this, so stick with me, right? Because you've probably got questions and scenario-based questions that are running through your brain right now as we're discussing this, but we'll get to them, all right? And certainly if I don't get to them, shoot me an email, kale@kalehouserleadership.com. Leave a comment, and we can certainly discuss. But you have to look at, is that customer a customer worth keeping, right? Maybe part of the problem is unrealistic expectations on your company by that customer, and they've reached that, because of you haven't met these expectations, whether they were articulated to you, clearly communicated to you or not, and that customer finally had enough. And unfortunately, maybe they started screaming at your account representative or something, and you need to step in at that point. But you need to ask yourself, is this a customer worth happening? Is this a repeat offense? Do they continually have these types of outbreaks? And I mean, that's kind of the age-old question of any, since the dawn of business, when something was exchanged for something else. Is it worth what I'm getting in exchange for dealing with you, the person that, has what I want? In this case, let's just say money. And that's something only you can answer as part of your business model. That's something only you have to decide up front, we will do anything in order to make that dollar and serve that customer, no matter what it costs us, whether it costs us culturally, financially, costs us people, whatever. Or is there a line that you say, customer X, Y, and Z, we appreciate that you've done business with us. We appreciate the opportunity that we've had to serve you. It's become apparent that we are not able to meet your needs how you are wanting them met. Thank you very much. Best of luck to you. If that ever changes in the future, we would love to entertain further and reevaluate our relationship, right? That's certainly one way you can approach it. But as you're going through that and deciding of if that customer can be what I'm calling rehabilitated into your culture, you really have to look at, that level deeper of what is causing this bad behavior. Now, I want to get back a little bit because specifically it was brought up, by my dad of what do you do, and is it appropriate to get rid of that customer in defense of how they treated your employee or how they treated your individual? So do you refuse them that service? And again, there's so many different ways this can be happening and practically play out in different businesses. The question again is, it depends. Did your employee do something to deserve that? Here air quotes, deserve that treatment in the middle of this experience? Did they provoke that customer, right? And that certainly could potentially be the case. Was it your employee that was in the wrong and garnered that reaction? So maybe it doesn't require an immediate rise on your part to be like, what, customer, you're not allowed to talk to my employees that way, get out of here, we're never doing business with you again, or kick you out of the store, or whatever that case is. Now, I'm not saying that, because there's a difference, right? Defend your people in public, like what's the saying, praise in public, critique in private, right? So that's certainly a case, and that's certainly a tact you can take, that you're defending your employee and their actions in public to your customer, and then in the background, after the situation's handled, you're like, hey, John, you really can't do that. Like, what's going on here? You've gotten 12 orders wrong this week with wrong cooked steak temperatures, right? I'm using a pretty simple example. But there is a situation where you don't want to fall on a sword that maybe isn't undeservedly so. But that also could be part of your culture, is like, we will defend you no matter what, right? Even if they are in the wrong, blah, 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 blah. But I guess that's what I'm trying to allude to, is how do you decide who to defend, who to, fall on your sword, to use that kind of quote, in sacrifice of your business and sacrifice of your culture for an individual. And that's really the tricky part about leadership. That's the tricky part about business. That's the tricky part about just doing interactions with other human beings, is there are so many varied experiences, and no 2 days will be alike, even if you do a very mundane or repetitive type process of business. You will run into people that they're having a bad day. Something happened at home. They just got a divorce, or a death in the family. Something tragic that has happened, and that impacts how they relate to other people. And that can a lot of times come out in a negative way that maybe isn't even necessarily intended. It's just pure reactionary on their part. And that's where you need to step in and kind of help get to the bottom of that. And certainly the process for doing that is different in, again, that acute scenario versus a more long-term. But I would argue in a long term, if you've got a customer that, say, has been doing business with your company, maybe you're a printing company or a t-shirt printing design company, and you've got a customer that's, placed several orders, they've never had complaints, and then all of a sudden, after you've brought in, because you're growing, you've brought in this new account manager, and now, CEO Steve of whatever corporation that needs more shirts for his retreats kind of flips out on either you or your new account manager, and you really need to kind of step back and say, okay, well, this is a little bit out of character for CEO Steve. What's going on here? And maybe start now digging into that a little bit more, because in that scenario, it could be that initial red flag of, hey, this employee is not working out, or this employee doesn't have the skills. How have I failed this employee in order to help them understand the level of service we value and provide here at our company? Okay, so those are all kind of things to consider as you run into this situation. I think in general, the answer isn't necessarily immediately refusing service to the offending party, because again, there are so many different inputs that could be factoring into this. I think probably in a restaurant scenario or some sort of retail scenario where you're not dealing as much with repeat customers, things of that nature, that you're not so long term on your sales cycle, that you could easily make a case that if a customer completely off the handle and being unreasonable, they're screaming and blah, 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 assuming alcohol is not involved. And even if it is, you're probably similar scenario that, you refuse service to them, you bounce them, because you do want to show as the leader of your organization that organization as a whole is a unit, is a unified unit, that not so much us against the public, right? You don't want to do that, but it's more of, hey, when this external factors come in and they start, insulting us or critiquing poorly what we do, despite evidence to the contrary, then you need to be able to defend that person and show them that you care and that their efforts are seen and valuable. All those types of things, right? You understand, I hope. But really now, flip this around a little bit. So this is the second part of this is have you been in that scenario where you've been the offending party, where you've been the one that's flipping out, where you've been the one that has reached their limits with, whatever long-term business that you've been doing business with as the client, as the customer, and how have you treated their employees poorly? And that's really the self-reflection part of this. Maybe I should start a series of self-reflection podcasts where we can kind of really evaluate our own behavior. But that's kind of what leadership is, right? It's a constant learning process and evaluation of how you want to be and how you want to be seen and treated and all those types of things. But I'd highly encourage you, think of an example in your life where you've kind of lost your cool, and what caused that. What kind of scenario, environment were you in? Was it purely acute? Something that happened that just, shot you through the roof? Was it caused by somebody else, like legitimately doing something to you? Or was it purely circumstantial? And kind of think about that in your own life. Does this happen all the time? Like every time you go out to dinner, you end up in a fight with the bartender or the server or the maitre d' or whatever. That may require a little bit more self-reflection if you're answering yes to that. But is this something that you found that it's become a problem on your end, or it just rarely happens and you recognize it as it comes and you do things to mitigate that? I would love to hear about it if you've got either ends of those spectrums to share with us in the audience, because I think it is a valuable thing that people need to understand and learn from, of how people handle conflict is really what it comes down to. All right, everybody. Short and sweet today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed the last couple podcast episodes. My interview with Aaron Riddell, the COO of Armor Solutions, was, I thought, just phenomenal. I highly encourage you to go back and listen to it once, twice, 3 times, because he had so much to say about leadership, especially through his various careers, whether that was in the military, outside the military, private sector, all those types of things, and the lessons that he had learned through his years of being a multi-potentialite. And I love that term. So thanks, Aaron, again for that. And again, thanks, Dad, for bringing up this topic. It is something that's very interesting to think about. So yeah, think about it. All right, everybody, drop me a line, Kale at kalehouserleadership.com. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, today, this afternoon, no matter where you're at in the world. Have a fantastic day. Bye.